So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of joining us today in this webinar. Welcome to our second webinar on gender and inclusive stakeholder engagement in NBSAPs under the Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. My name is Olivier Rukundo. I'll be your moderator today, along with Laura, and I am from the CBD Secretariat. I'm a head of the Peoples and Biodiversity Unit, overseeing also the Gender and Biodiversity portfolio. So a few logistical information to get us started. Interpretation is available in English, French, and Spanish. I would like to highlight some key logistical issues so the workshop can go smoothly. If you have technical issues, send a private Zoom message to Martina Ekaniz. She will help resolve the issues as quickly as possible. Please do not use the chat group as it would overcloud things. Your microphones will be muted during all sessions. This will help ensure our speakers can be heard clearly. If you want to ask questions, if you have the following options, you can either type your question in the Zoom chat box and we'll address them during the Q&A sessions, or you can virtually raise your hand in the control panel. We will ask you to open your microphone during the open discussion segments of today's webinar. So this is a big group, so it will take too long to introduce each participant individually in an effort to get to know who is in the meeting and still respect the limited time we have. I'm kindly asking you to please introduce yourself in the chat, and I thank you for that. As you all are introducing yourself in the chat, I'd like to also quickly run through what we covered in the first webinar, so that we're all starting from the same page. As you are all likely aware, this webinar is the second in the two-session webinar on gender and CBD on the country's NBSAPs. So I'll briefly go through a refresh on what was covered in webinar one. In the meantime, for those who were able to attend, please write in the chat your thought in response to the questions as to what resonated with you most during the first webinar that we had. All right, so the first webinar we conducted at the end of July aimed at emphasizing the importance of including stakeholder engagement, particularly the meaningful participation of women and underrepresented groups in achieving equitable biodiversity outcome. This first webinar also clarified how gender is featured in the Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework and explained why gender is essential to the implementation of the framework and to the update and implementation, monitoring, and reporting under the National Biodiversity Strategies and Action Plans. I hope many of you were able to attend that first webinar, as this webinar will actually build on what was covered then. And if you are unable to make it and haven't received an email with the recording from webinar one, do not worry. Today will still be informative and hopefully very helpful, and we can send those recordings to you after today. All right, so what are today's objectives? After time to reflect on the lesson learned from webinar one, today we will hear from some of you about your own experiences in implementing gender-responsive conservation action to encourage cross-collaboration and learning. We'll then move to short presentation from a few projects that are here to provide you support, and we seek to learn how to integrate gender in your NBSAP's work and processes. We want you to know what support is out there and how to access it. That's the aim. The goals of today are to facilitate action and collaboration by introducing the countries to technical support available and relevant examples illustrating access to support for gender integration in upcoming NBSAPs and, of course, the 7 national reports. Overall, our hope is that this series will contribute to building an enabling environment to strengthen capacity for practical implementation, including cross-cutting collaboration and action to apply gender indicator monitoring and budgeting. So we're very excited to have you all here today and to learn from each other during this series. Now, to achieve the objective of this webinar, we'll go through a few brief sessions today. To best place ourselves, we already had a short refresh on what covered in webinar one. We'll soon move to a brief moment for the audience engagement, where we'll ask you to reflect on practical steps you have taken to integrate gender in your work. So please be prepared to engage. Once we've heard from all of you, we'll then move into presentation from for some of your presentations, which will hopefully help answer this question as to what does support for designing and implementing gender response action look like. This experience sharing will then follow smoothly into a panel presentation where we'll hear directly from a few projects and hosts of the webinar that are here to provide you the support. Once we've heard from this project, we'll then have time for Q&A to make sure all the questions are answered. And then we'll then close with a word from Veona Colantes from the Jeff on our key partner, one of our key partners and host in this webinar. All right, as I've just warned you or alerted you before, we would like to start a short interactive activity to understand experiences. Please use the Zoom whiteboard or chat to respond to the following questions, which are: what have you done in the past to implement the GPA, the Gender Plan of Action in your country, or to scale up gender responsive activities? How have you accessed support for gender interaction in the past through what initiative? And Laura will kindly share the whiteboard with Awel, or you can add on note using sticky notes to respond to this prompt. And if you have any trouble with the tech, please feel free to write your responses idea in the chat instead. We'll monitor the chat and make sure that your inputs are taken into account. Thank you very much. So we'll give you just a few minutes to just do that so we can see what comes out of that.
Laura, I cannot see the questions anymore. Are they still there, or did someone delete them, unfortunately?
They have been deleted, but I will go ahead and add them right back.
Okay.
So it looks like some colleagues are putting some great ideas from our last webinar in the chat. Some good reminders of the different components of work that can be done to ensure gender integration, like making sure you have a gender responsive budget, also recognizing the value of gender mainstreaming across all programming and how it can be relevant in any component of a program or project or activity. Also noting how important it is to do a gender analysis for their projects to make sure that their projects are informed. I see some people are getting really happy and fun with the features of the whiteboard. Also a good reminder that, this is maybe some of the work to do gender integration and the appreciation for the value of gender integration. It can be relatively new. It hasn't been a key component of programming that's always existed in our work. So it's a good kind of grounding reminder for the webinar we had last time and then this one as well. I see everyone's still pretty active, which is great to see how we can do gender responsive analyses of national budgets. There are gender policies that exist, but also how important it is to have, I think maybe by master plan, maybe a gender action plan for the work that we do. This is all really, really great. We also did, I see there's notes on how there's been programming and actions and activities to work with women's cooperatives. Engaging with consultants, all kinds of different things that we can do. Are there any pieces jumping out for you, Olivier? Though I feel like I've covered a lot.
Yes, no, I think that's pretty good, quite a good summary. But I'm also very happy to see that there's a lot of elements that are coming from webinar 1 that are actually building on to what we're trying to do today. So I think these are all great inputs.
Yeah, amazing. I also see some great comments in the chat, which is also great that people are using because the whiteboard can get kind of tricky. So great to see the comment in the chat from Guatemala, how in Guatemala they're doing projects, pilot projects to amplify coverage across different regions. So really getting a countrywide effort going, which is really nice, great, and encouraging and inspiring to hear. Thanks for sharing that in the chat.
Thank you, Laura. I think this is a pretty good summary and of what has emanated, and thanks everyone for sharing these ideas. And hopefully this has prompted some ideas about how to access support and what support might look like, as I saw that there were some issues also capacity being raised there. Now, to get us to hear more detail directly from a few of you, we are very fortunate today to be able to hear from our colleagues Nozima Rizolva from Tajikistan and Leila Ben Abdeladdin from Tunisia today to hear about two things. What assistance have they received on gender integration in NBSAP's development or in the support of the implementation of the Curie-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework and its GPA? What was the impact of the assistance they received? So once we hear from them, we'll get a short presentation from our colleague at TED Biodiversity Alliance, Marlene Elias, on a suggested timeline of what countries can be doing regarding gender as they continue progress in NBSAP update, revision, and of course, the creation and elaboration of the 7th National Report. So we do hope that these presentations will provide you with some useful and practical inspiration. And so with this, I'd like to hand over to Nazanin for a presentation. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Oliver. Can you hear me well?
You can hear very well. Please go right ahead.
Super, super. Thank you so much. So just previously, I want to say if I will miss something, maybe I'm not sure to what extent I understood correctly your expectation, but nevertheless, I try to. Can you move to the next slide? I try just structurally show my answer to your expectation, but I will be more detailed in my presentation, oral presentation. Okay. So
Great.
first of all, I think it should be mentioned that Tajikistan today has updated its national biodiversity targets, reviewed and updated in line with the GBF and its targets and goals. And I'm happy to say that more than 90% of these national targets has a higher compliance with the global targets and goals, including the separate targets on gender responsive actions. This is relevant to say that when we were updating the national targets, we fully relied on existing national policy and legislative documents, which in turn prioritize the empowerment of women in different sectoral processes, including environment. Global targets, global goals, and considerations identified in GBF served as the roadmap in this process, in the process of updating the national targets, and directly in the process of updating the strategy. Accordingly, the principle of respect for women's rights, inclusivity, and participation were taken into account in formulating our multi-component targets. So talking about the supporting in the process of developing so relevant strategic documents on biodiversity conservation, I would like to mention the supporting of GEF and financial supporting of GEF and consulting and technical supporting of UNDP, CBD Secretariat, and the assistant of global technical team. So we get this support on the GBF Early Action Support Project that we have successfully implemented and completed already. Frankly, the assistant noted made possible the national process of reviewing, analyzing, and updating of biodiversity target, taking into account the COP15 decisions and GBF provision as well. The knowledge and capacity of country teams was significantly increased through separate webinars focused on gender issues and other additional aspects also. So to date, we are on the stage, very relevant stage for us. We're updating the national strategy and action plans. And these initiatives is also implementing with the supporting of GEF and UNDP team, country team. So hiring of experts, conducting of consultative meetings will contribute and foster the deep analyzing of existing national mechanisms, new trends, opportunities and limitations that women face in environmental processes. Here I will note separately that Tajikistan now is the part of the global project on accelerating systemic change for gender equality and biodiversity conservation through MBSAPs. So the results and achievements of this initiative will serve as the main contribution to the process of updating our MBSAP. I think that analytical and consultative work that is planned to be under this project will help us to develop actual and evidence-based recommendations for inclusion in the strategy and action plan on biodiversity conservation. In addition, this project expands opportunity to study and use practices and tools used in other countries through the new MBSAP Bridge Sparkbull platform. So we have already registered to this platform. We believe that it is important for country teams updating national strategies to understand which approaches and practices in studying gender issues in the context of biodiversity work most effectively, and how the findings can be integrated in the strategy and subsequent actions on biodiversity conservation. Our membership, I mean Tajikistan membership in MBSAP Accelerating Partnership allow us to become a participant in the aforementioned project, thereby strengthening its position in implementing gender actions, as well as integrating issues of women participation into biodiversity processes. In addition, through participation in matchmaking mechanism, much needed resources can be obtained for the implementation of global and national biodiversity targets. The first step has already been taken by Tajikistan, and the feedback from the first project application, we get this feedback received recently from one potential partner. But we will move in the same direction and will apply with the next project concepts on the current cycle for matchmaking mechanism. So my apologies if I missed some information that you were expecting, but you can ask additional question if you want. I just tried to keep the time.
Thank you very much, Nazamini, and really good to see you here. And thank you for this great presentation, but also for your active participation in many of the CBD process. And it's always good to have you here. So I think you've actually really answered the questions that we had asked in terms of the assistance received, and I'm sure this will help other colleagues sort of also have some ideas as to what kind of support they can receive and what can be sort of taken up. I'll now give the floor to Rim, please.
Oui, alors bonjour.
Hello, good morning. My name is Rim Buruba Mamluk. I'm an expert in public finance and gender mainstreaming in public policy, climate and biodiversity, UNDP Tunisia. And I'm going to talk about the gender mainstream. I'm sorry, she has a very loud noise in her audio. If someone could please ask her to correct her sound system. It is very difficult to follow what she's saying. There is an interference in her sound system, which makes it very difficult to follow. If someone could please tell her to verify her connection. The audio is distorted. Please tell her to correct her problem with the mic. Thank you.
Petit souci avec votre audio. C'est un peu dur de vous entendre. Je voulais vous suggérer, si c'était possible peut-être de. Je sais que vous êtes avec Leïla, c'était possible peut-être de parler parce que on a des soucis de son.
Est-ce que vous m'entendez là?
On vous entend, mais avec un bruit de fond assez,
D'accord.
assez fort.
D'accord, donc je vais... Là, ça va mieux ou pas? Non?
Non, c'est toujours un peu compliqué. On a quelques messages aussi dans le chat.
Donc,
Je ne sais pas si Leïla est à côté de vous, peut-être de...
Oui, Leïla est à côté de toi, on va juste...
Alors maintenant, on a un souci d'écho.
Est-ce que ça va mieux là?
Ah là, c'est bon. Ok, ça devrait être tout bon.
Yes.
Ok.
Is it working now?
Très bien.
Yes.
Alors, je vais lui
Thank you
passer-
very much.
Très bien, je vais lui passer mon PC à l'autre.
So she's going to use my computer.
Voilà.
Apologies.
Tout à l'heure,
Okay, thank you.
Bon, c'est bon. Ça va maintenant? Est-ce que tout le monde
Is it
m'entend
working
bien?
now? Can you hear
Très
me?
bien, merci.
Très bien. Alors,
Thank you.
donc je reprends très rapidement.
So
Donc,
I will
on est
resume.
très heureux,
We are
d'avoir
very
l'opportunité,
happy to have the
d'intervenir
opportunity
dans l'Alliance
to
tunisienne.
present our
Et là, la Tunisie, elle a
experience in
pu
Tunisia.
bénéficier du
Tunisia
soutien technique et
is
financier
receiving
projet
financial and
GBFQAS.
technical help
Et pour cette
from
initiative,
the
et cela
TEF
en
Region
référence
project.
au cadre
And
mondial
thanks to this
biodiversité et
initiative,
émerveillement
we are
régional,
being able to
notamment
work
dans
in
la
the
cible 23,
NBSAP
en conformité
and
également
mainly with the
au
target
plan d'action
22.
d'égalité des
And
sexes
also, we are
2022-2030,
working
mais également
in
du
the
plan
action
d'action
plan
20
for
du
gender
projet
equality
EAS-GBF.
and
Donc
also
cet
the
appui, en fait, il est venu en
EAS-GBF Gender
conformité
Action
opérationnelle,
Plan.
continuité
So this support
stratégique
ensured
avec la
a strategic
révision donc, de la
continuity with the
stratégie
revision of the
d'action nationale pour la
NBSAP
biodiversité et
and
la
the
préparation également du 7e
preparation
rapport
of the
des ONU.
7th
Et
National
cela afin
Report
de mieux aligner les
to
engagements de la
better
Tunisie avec
align
les objectifs
Tunisia's
de l'ONU.
commitments with the global
Next
objectives.
slide, s'il vous plaît.
Next slide,
Voilà.
please.
Donc, cette intégration du genre dans la stratégie et le
So,
plan d'action national
integrating
pour la
gender into
biodiversité
the
et sa mise en
NBSAP
œuvre, on
and
va
its
présenter
implementation
notre expérience, donc
is what we're going to
l'impact en
present
fait de
today. We will
ce
present
soutien-là.
our
C'est que
experience
c'est un
and the
processus qui
impact
s'est
assistance.
structuré en 4
We have rolled out a four-step process. The first process was mobilization of financial support from the deaf, and throughout the documents that demonstrated the importance of integrating the gender perspective and their strategic orientation. The second step was the integration of gender into the NPSAP and throughout two other processes. And there was another step that gave the focus on participatory consolidation of the Gender Action Plan and the gradual implementation of the Gender Action Plan. So we are going to explain each one of these steps. So on the first step, mobilizing financial mobilizing financial support for the deaf EAS project. Tunisia presented a solid foundation to demonstrate that in Tunisia, we have a clear orientation towards gender equality and its clear strategic orientation in this direction. We have, for instance, in the legal framework, several laws to combat discrimination and violence against women. We also have a national gender strategy ever since 2016 with our national plan, which included an impact on resilience to climate change, and National Gender and Climate Plan 2022. And one of the objectives in this program dwells on the women's inclusion and these endeavors. We also have the climate plan and national gender on 2022, and here we adopted gender budgeting, and it is within this institutional framework that we have put in place the whole strategy. After the financial support that we received in the first stage of this process of drafting and implementation, we also started working our gender action plan, which was a process led in two phases. We have a first step to make to conduct the necessary analysis on diversity and resource preservation. And then we landed to the gender action plan aligned with the NBSAPs based on the results and recommendation of the analysis. For the analysis, we took a mixed approach, and we also provided a contextualized diagnosis with a desk review, where we took into consideration all the pre-existing tax strategies that were in line with biodiversity and resource conservation. And we also conducted qualitative interviews with various stakeholders and NGOs. And when it comes to the analysis, we were based in various axes, namely the context of gender inequalities, regulatory, strategic, and institutional framework. We also focused on biodiversity and conservation, also the disparities and strengths in terms of the empowerment of the women and also access to land. We gave examples of major projects to examine their implication with biodiversity and conservation. We also to make sure that the gender dimension was taken into consideration. And after this analysis, we also identified the persistent disparities in Tunisia in terms of equality. And this allowed us to look at good practices that already existed and that will be interesting to take into consideration in the action plan. And finally, concrete recommendations that enabled us to integrate gender into the NBSAP. Now, the second step of this process, in the process of generating the action plan, was the gender action plan. We used 7 entry points for integrating gender into biodiversity. And the 7 entry points were inspired from the guidelines of the UNDP to support the drafting of this plan. We took into consideration economic measures, women's knowledge, inclusive consultations, leadership opportunities, and also the collectivity of the data and digitalization. And this led us to this gender action plan using the 7 entry points that we were going to include also in our plan of action. How did we do this? Well, we followed the following approach. The gender action plan followed the objectives that were gender sensitive, objectives for each strategic area of the NBSAP. We also tried to look at opportunities of integrating the gender sensitive approach within the 7 set points of entry, which I already mentioned. And these operational objectives were translated into concrete actions to respond to a double challenge, to integrate throughout these actions a budget, a gender budget, and also to strengthen women's role into biodiversity so that they could play their role. And in the end, we have identification of indicators and targets to monitor results and implementation. So all measures in the plan of action were linked to the objectives already mentioned in the action plan for biodiversity. The next step that is being deployed now in Tunisia is what we are consolidating right now. Throughout a greater participatory approach, throughout workshops in the various regions, we have conducted consultations to integrate women's voices so that they can have their place and their participation at the decision-making process throughout also feminist organizations. And in the consolidation phase, we have also addressed the skill strengthening regional, locally, and we also have disseminated good practices which are included in this plan of action. Next slide. In terms of the implementation of the gender action plan, we made a difference between 2 kinds of activities that are gender sensitive activities. The first type has to do with the gender sensitive activities linked to activities already planned in the NBSAPs, and other activities which are pretty much the same with the gender sensitive approach, which are going to benefit from budgeting and mobilization. And the second type of activity are activities that are gender-specific activities not covered by the NBSAP, which require the mobilization of dedicated resources. And here we have 2 sources for financing. The first, we have the support from donors, which is very important whenever we submit projects that are very well presented, then we obtain this aid, and then the inclusion in the state budget at the level of ministries involved in biodiversity. Ever since 2003, we have a budget entry that is distributed among different departments. All departments must identify and activities, gender-sensitive activities, and use the budget that has been allocated. So we are using those existing mechanisms to integrate gender-sensitive activities, and this is what we've done. And of course, each time there needs to be a solid narrative to ask these kind of actions. Because yes, it is very well to have this financial aid, but sometimes there are some obstacles if the donors are not convinced. So we need to have this help from the government in order to incorporate these activities. So this is it. I hope that I have given you an overview of what we have been doing. And yes, this was our experience. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Madame Rim, for your very interesting and informative presentation, explaining what you have been able to implement. Thank you very much again for your presentation.
Marlene, to give us some idea about some timeline in terms of the update revision of NBSABs and also the inclusion of the implementation issues related to the gender plan of action. So Marlene, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Can we have the next slide, please? Great, thank you so much. So I'm presenting here what is a roadmap that was developed in the context of the project that Ms. Nazanin Razulova mentioned earlier, called Accelerating Systemic Change for Gender Equality and Biodiversity Conservation through NBSAPs. I'll tell you a bit more about the project later, but in a nutshell, the project is accompanying 7 countries in developing gender-responsive NBSAPs and in advancing targets 22 and 23, specifically through what are country-led processes. So in the context of the project, we developed the roadmap that you can see here, which proposes some milestones that countries can use as guidance to update their NBSAPs and to develop gender-responsive inputs in their 7th national reports. The idea is to help them develop and manage information, engage in consultations with key actors, including as central actors, IPNLCs and grassroots women's groups, to guide national decisions in terms of gender responsive and inclusion priorities and biodiversity actions. So you can see here the 6-month roadmap, which is starting now in September and runs into February. And it actually aligns very closely with the concrete example that Ms. Abdelrahim just shared for Tunisia. So that was an excellent concrete example with rich detail. So this is a much more generic and general roadmap, but essentially it starts with this data collection or gender analysis on in relation to biodiversity. So as the previous speakers both mentioned, and we also saw some inputs on the board, on the virtual board. This is a really critical step in terms of understanding the gender and biodiversity nexus, existing national commitments in this space, looking at where the country already has relevant activities and actions on gender and biodiversity across sectors, to set the scene or frame what will be the subsequent actions and decisions. So the second step is about consulting with women's groups and with gender specialists. So this is really, and it's very much at the center of this project, ensuring the active participation and the voice of IP NLCs, and particularly grassroots women. So this is in the process of identifying priorities, of understanding better the realities of women who are on the front line of biodiversity management. And this is also here, we've also lumped it together with engaging with gender experts who have also a strong understanding of these key issues in the national context. The third step here is this workshop on capacity building on gender, biodiversity, and NBSAPs, which is really about delivering or having intentional efforts, intentional investments in strengthening the capacities on gender and inclusion of national actors who are involved in the NBSAP update. So it starts with assessing capacities, tailoring capacity strengthening actions to be able to address the knowledge gaps that in this area. Fourth step is identifying gender transformative actions for nature. So this really builds then on the previous steps, on the gender analysis, on the priorities that have been identified during the consultations with women from IPNLCs, on the capacity strengthening to now move into the solution space. And it can be done through a national working group. Here we've proposed a group that would include gender and biodiversity representatives from the relevant ministries that deal with gender and with biodiversity, so Ministry of Environment, but also national women's or gender machineries. And finally, developing and validating these recommendations for gender actions that can be incorporated in the NBSAPs and in NBSAP implementation. So prioritizing actions, targets, indicators that can be included in an action plan, validating those, of course, with the working group that's been established, and also starting to implement these other complementary actions that will really place gender and inclusion firmly on the agenda. So for example, here we've put organizing a gender session and reviewing and providing recommendations during the NBSAP review process. And there are more details here, which you can consult if you'd like. I believe the presentation will be shared after the fact, so you can have a read at these details, and they'll also be available on the repository, which I will mention a little bit later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marlene, for this very rich but also very concise presentation and with a lot of information. Yes, and I'm sure that participants will sort of dig into that information once they have the presentation. And I think this will be also good framing for our next section. And on this, I will hand over the moderation to my colleague, Laura, who will take over the moderation of the next session. Laura, over to you.
Thank you. Amazing. Thanks, everyone. Those were really helpful and informative examples of all the ways that our participants here can be inspired to integrate gender in the work that they're doing. So thanks so much for those presentations. We're now going to move into another sort of panel setup presentation session where you'll all hear about and discover the multiple ways that you can receive technical assistance. We'll hopefully help to answer any questions that you might have about, well, what can I access in terms of when it comes to the needs that I have for gender integration? So we'll hear from our great webinar hosts. We'll hear from those that you see on this slide here to learn more about the projects that they manage and how these projects can support you all to respond to your needs, again, regarding gender integration in your NBSAP process. So each presenter will cover information on who can access the assistance that they provide, what kind of assistance that they provide, and how you can access that assistance. What are the next steps that you should follow to reach out and access support? So first, we'll actually hear from our colleagues at both UNEP and UNDP. We'll hear from Anthony Kamau and Tanya McGregor and Marian Marigo about the JEF8 umbrella program. So if we move to the next slide, please. I'll let those colleagues take over and share a little bit more about this project and the assistance that it can provide to you all. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Laura. I hope everyone can hear me. I'm connecting virtually as you all are, but my internet connection was a little unstable earlier. So please let me know if there's any issues. As Laura mentioned, I'm going to speak a little bit about the GEF enabling activities that were mentioned earlier and the support that's available for addressing gender considerations. This is specifically related to the work to update the MBSAPs and to prepare the 7th national reports to the convention that are due in February of 2026. So this support is available to all the GEF eligible countries that are receiving support under the GEF 8 project. So that's 139 countries that are supported by UNEP and UNDP together. And there's support for, so one is to access support for accessing capacity building activities. So that includes things such as this webinar, peer-to-peer trainings, and other types of learning opportunities. Okay, maybe I will turn off my camera. I can see a comment that the connection is not great. So I will just turn off my camera and I will keep speaking, but if you can't hear me, my colleague might need to step in. My colleague Anthony, he was also on the call. I'd also like to highlight the one-to-one dedicated support with the gender expert, in this case, Laura, who's one of the experts available for this support. She is working with UNDP countries. UNEP is also looking to provide similar support that can be available for countries to support with review of documents, undertaking gender analysis, or looking at plans for developing a stakeholder engagement plan. And further, there is the technical guidance that has been produced related to incorporating gender in MBSAP preparation and alignment of biodiversity targets. And this was produced during the Early Action Support Project, which is the precursor to the GEF 8 MBSAP and 7th National Report Project. And so we have some information on the screen here about the contact points for UNEP and UNDP related to the gender support work. And I will hand things over to my colleague, Marion, who will also speak a bit more on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanya. Yes, indeed. And as Tanya mentioned, this is a joint project, and so we're here jointly to support you. Just very briefly, as example, previously and so far, 17 countries have requested bilateral calls with the gender stakeholder engagement consultant to really focus on introducing gender consideration into their NBSAP, or ask questions about specific contexts in the countries and see how we can support in regard with everyone's specific context. We very much rely on the national teams for their experience, but we can then bring on some knowledge to support you in this process, so do not hesitate. And for instance, Uruguay and Peru requested previously targeted training session so that they could discuss this concept of gender and biodiversity to other key government officials from different departments within the Ministry of Environment. And these were each, I think, 2-hour-long session that we as the global team were supporting and that were led by the national team. And it was a really good experience to share, national context and maybe examples of prior experience, right? Working on NBSAP, gender, but also experience from other sectors like NDCs, right? So these sessions were an occasion to have about 20 representatives from each of the governments to join in. And I think that really ties back to what Rim was saying in the case of Tunisia also, where there was a dissemination of knowledge with other colleagues, right? That make it more powerful. So I'll leave it here because we have other presentation, and thank you, Tanya. As you can see on the screen, if you need any support, you can reach out to Tanya McGregor or Leah Phillips that many of you must know at this stage, and we're here to support. So thank you very much, and over to you, Laura.
Thank you. Thank you both. That was very informative, great, clear, to the point information on what kind of support can be provided and how to access it, who can access it. And Tanya, you reminded me that I did not introduce myself. So hello, everyone. If you were not able to join webinar one, I'm Laura Cooper Hall, and I'm a gender consultant at UNDP and supporting this Jeff 8 NBSAP and 7th National Report project. So it's great to be here, and thank you again for that great presentation. I also wanted to mention before moving on to our next great presentation that as you are listening, participants, please feel free to put any questions you have in the chat. I will be monitoring that, and we will be flowing into a Q&A after our presentation. So don't hold back. All questions are great. Please share those in the chat function. All right, next slide. So we'll hear from Marlene again, who will present on the project that she mentioned earlier, NBSAP AP, to hear more about what support can be provided from them. Please go ahead, Marlene.
Thank you, thanks. Okay, so the project, as I mentioned, it's called Accelerating Systemic Change for Gender Equality and Biodiversity Conservation through NBSAPs. It's an 18-month project. It runs to March 2026, so it follows the timeline of the roadmap that I shared earlier. It's funded by the Government of Canada and led by the NBSAP Accelerator Partnership, implemented by UNEP, UNDP, the Alliance of Biodiversity International, and CIAT, in close collaboration with the Secretariat of the CBD. And essentially, it supports 7 countries from different regions to achieve systemic change, to address biodiversity conservation and gender equality hand in hand through what is a country-driven approach. So it really is there to support countries in their priorities, but through proposing some guidance that can help them in terms of process for identifying and prioritizing biodiversity actions that are gender responsive. So it focuses, as I mentioned earlier, on targets 22 and 23, and also on the gender plan of action 2023 to 2030. And its emphasis is on increasing technical and institutional capacity on gender equality and on systems thinking for biodiversity conservation, on creating awareness and increasing outreach to relevant actors, and very centrally on increasing the participation, the active participation and the leadership of IPNLCs and grassroots women to co-create these country-specific solutions for gender responsive biodiversity actions. So the idea is that the solutions that are developed in the context of the project will eventually be submitted to the NBSAP Accelerator Partnerships matchmaking mechanism to link what countries have identified country needs with available technical and financial support. And the project also has a global learning and knowledge sharing component, which I'll speak about in a minute. And the 7 countries involved are Antigua and Barbuda, Costa Rica, Comoros, Eswatini, Tajikistan, Thailand, and Togo. And so how are we providing this assistance to the countries? Essentially, we're providing assistance to incorporate gender considerations in NBSAPs and 7th national reports, including through the roadmap that I shared earlier and through close accompaniment of the countries throughout. We've developed a toolkit that can facilitate also systemic inquiry processes into gender and biodiversity. So it's really meant as a companion to the milestones from the roadmap that I presented earlier, and especially helpful in terms of supporting consultations with key actors, IPNLCs, women's groups, that to help identify in a very participatory way what are the key issues or challenges in terms of gender and biodiversity in the national context. who are the key actors and stakeholders who need to be involved, and what are possible actions and solutions. And so the toolkit includes 7 tools that are presented in this guide as a set to guide different moments in that consultation process. We've also set up a gender and BSAP's bridge, which is a global help desk and a resource center to support a community of practice among the 7 countries involved in the project, and to offer a space that can help facilitate an exchange of resources and experiences, good practices, of lessons learned. And this space is online on a platform called Spark Blue. It's an interactive site. It's constantly evolving. We're adding resources there progressively. And then through this NBSAP bridge, through this global help desk, we're also offering periodic online sessions on different themes and processes related to gender and biodiversity, to strengthen capacities of those involved in the countries. And we've had an initial workshop. We're having a closing workshop as well in person with the 7 countries. And the idea is really to support that peer-to-peer exchange and capacity building. And we're developing and supporting countries in developing national and global knowledge products. So this is really to be able to say the project only involves closely 7 countries, but the idea is really to be able to share their experiences and those learnings in ways that can be useful to other countries, beyond those involved in the project, using having very concrete examples of what can be done, and being honest about what has gone well and what has been more difficult, to be able to be useful for other parties as well. So who can access the assistance? I've talked about these 7 countries, but it's open to others as well in terms of that resource center. For example, Spark Blue can be accessed publicly. The link is at the bottom of this slide. I'll also paste it in the chat afterwards. And you can find there the toolkit I mentioned. You can find information from the experiences of the 7 countries and key resources on gender and biodiversity at Spark Blue or on Spark Blue. The global and the national knowledge products that I just mentioned are also publicly accessible. So they are in production now, but the idea is that they will be there to inform all the parties. So I'll invite you to keep an eye on Spark Blue, where they'll also be shared, and there will certainly be other channels for their dissemination. We'll also be sharing the learnings from the project at the end of the project. So we hope you can join that as well. And you can see here at the bottom, there's the email of my colleague, Andrea Quesada, and my own email. If you want more information on the project or the tools, please don't hesitate to reach out. I can paste those as well in the chat. So thank you very much. And back to you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Marlene. And I see there's already interest coming through the chat in Spark Blue and all the information that you've shared. So thank you so much. And thank you as well for your earlier presentation. Already all of us, though we are not necessarily all from those 7 countries, are benefiting from the project by learning more about that through that example timeline that you shared. So thank you. And last but not least, we have our 3rd project that we'll be hearing from. We'll be hearing from Özlem Çulhacı, who will be sharing more about Biofin, the Biofin project. So please, Özlem, please go ahead.
Thank you, Laura. I would like to take a few minutes to share how Biofin supports countries in systematically integrating gender equality into biodiversity finance planning and implementation. We know that biodiversity finance solutions will only be truly effective and sustainable if they are inclusive and gender responsive. Women, indigenous people, youth, and marginalized groups are not only disproportionately affected by biodiversity loss, they are also key actors in creating solutions. If their perspectives and capacities are not included, we risk missing both impact and legitimacy in the finance strategies we design. This is why Biofin has made gender equality a central pillar of our work. Our goal is to ensure that finance solutions deliver tangible results for both gender equality and nature, moving us closer to the ambitions of the coming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. So, what kind of support do we provide? Let me highlight here a few areas. First, we are developing global guidance and tools to help countries integrate gender equality into biodiversity finance plans and into specific finance solutions. These practical resources will make it easier for teams to apply gender-responsive approaches consistently. Second, we offer country-level technical assistance. This allows us to work closely with teams as they design and implement finance solutions, making sure gender considerations are not an afterthought, but embedded from the start. Third, we focus on capacity building of national teams. Strengthening knowledge and skills on the gender biodiversity finance nexus is essential for long-term impact. So we invest in workshops, trainings, and peer exchanges that build this capacity. For example, we had one capacity building training in Fiji. Fourth, we strengthen gender programming at the global and regional levels. We make sure that our major events and workshops meaningfully address gender equality. For example, there was a dedicated gender session at the Biofin annual conference this year in Chile in May. And in June in Rwanda, we had a gender session and one gender session is coming up at our regional Asia-Pacific regional dialogue taking place in Vietnam. In addition, we provide gender help desks at regional and global conferences so countries can access on-the-spot support. You can consider this as like doctor appointments. Fifth, we facilitate the sharing of good practices between countries. Several countries have already achieved strong results on gender equality and biodiversity finance, and their experiences can inspire and guide others. Peer learning is one of Biofin's strongest assets. Finally, we provide guidance on stakeholder engagement. Every biodiversity finance plan should ensure that women, indigenous people, youth, and marginalized groups are meaningfully included. To support this, we developed a stakeholder engagement template that includes a gender and social inclusion checklist as a practical tool. Together, these forms of support create a comprehensive package that countries can draw on. And importantly, all 91 Biofin GEF countries can access to these tools. To conclude, I want to emphasize that gender-responsive biodiversity finance is not just a technical requirement. It is about ensuring fairness, legitimacy, and impact. Finance solutions that work for gender equality and nature will be stronger, more inclusive, and more sustainable. Therefore, we invite all Biofin countries to make full use of the support available so we can collectively advance towards climate, nature, and gender-positive finance solutions. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. That was a great presentation and also very, very helpful to get even a little more specific about where we're talking about gender integration with that focus on biodiversity finance specifically and that type of support that countries can access. So thank you so much, Özlem. And thank you all three projects as hosts of these two webinars that we've had so far, and for your presentations on the support that countries can access. So here we have on the slide, on the screen, all of the contact information of the people you just heard from for those specific projects that can provide you all support. We hope that starting point of examples of types of support that have already been given, and then that timeline as well of some kind of hypothetical ways that gender can be, or support can be accessed for gender integration and where gender integration can happen. And then that flow into these specific opportunities that exist to provide you with support has been a helpful flow. So here's all the contact info of those speakers. And now we actually have about 10 minutes for Q&A. I haven't seen, I don't believe, any questions come through in the chat yet to our speakers. Now, this is a Q&A where we can ask questions of those project speakers we just heard from, but also from our earlier representatives from Tunisia and Tajikistan as well, to hear more about the work that they did and how they accessed support for that gender integration. So please, any questions in the chat? I see that there are some about accessing resources from Biofin and that there's a website shared in the chat. That's great. Thank you, Camille, for Biofin, for the Biofin resources, and Oslam too. Thank you. And yes, Marianne had a great comment, great mention in the chat that questions can also be shared in French and in Spanish. And if you'd like, prefer to unmute and raise your hand and ask your question audibly, we're also very open to that format of questions as well. So any questions from our participants today? Of course, with no questions, I think that just means we've had incredibly informative, answered all the questions through these informative presentations, which is a great sign too. Marianne, please go ahead.
Yeah, since the crowd is a little quiet, I actually have a question for participants, and I see there's a lot of us today. My question is on what is next, and we heard such great content from the country's representatives across the two webinars, not just today, but also a month ago. And I'm wondering if there is an interest in continuing this discussion, maybe in a slightly different format, more so a peer-to-peer exchange. And so I'm curious to see if some of the participants today think this would be interesting and relevant to dive a little deeper, maybe in the work that some countries have been doing. So if I can have maybe a thumbs up or some comment in the chat if you think this is helpful, or a suggestion on what makes more sense in terms of activities, that will be great. So I do see at least one thumb up coming to me, so thank you. Yeah, I see several thumbs up coming indeed. So it looks like the peer-to-peer could be interesting. So that's something we can keep in mind and continue working on. Thanks, Laura.
Yes, that's a great point, Marianne. If you all don't have questions for us, then we will definitely take advantage of the time and ask questions of you all of the participants here today. Peer-to-peer, definitely some ideas that we have for providing continuous support to you all on gender integration ideas. It's great to see that there's interest in that you all think that could be a great and helpful next step. If you have other ideas for specific support that might come to you as an individual, or specific support that could be accessed by more than one at one time, for example, another topic for a webinar, or again, the peer-to-peer, any other ideas, we're all ears. And if people are feeling, it's either a little too late in the day, too early in the day, we can also transition into our closing remarks. We have a fantastic closing remarks speaker that we can hear from. Oh, I see some questions coming in. Wonderful. First one, are there any documents that contain the lessons learned from the 6th National Reports Progress Review on Gender that can be shared? Anyone want to respond to that first question? Please go ahead. Go ahead, Marianne.
Yeah, I can jump in. And there has been, and maybe Leah, if you are still on the call and you would like to jump in, feel free to. There has been a review. So the 6th National Report, where the first one was actually a strong encouragement to have gender responsive, to generate a gender responsive 6th National Report. And we saw really an increase in the efforts at the national level to do so. Also emphasizing the gaps, right? Because it is really hard to respond and make a gender responsive 6th National Report if you do not have data, and you cannot have data if you don't have the right indicators, right? So that also put into perspective a lot of the issues that the national teams were facing at the time, and we're hopefully trying to respond right now in this process of revision of NBSAP and 7th national report to some of those big gaps, right? So one of the elements that came out of it was a technical guidance that several of us in this call actually worked on. It was a joint effort, as it is often among our teams, to highlight some key entry points to make NVSAP and national reporting more gender sensitive. And I can look for the link there. Leah, you might have the link handy. If not, I can do that after. But it was more a dive into what can be the entry points that, can be used to focus on gender and really make either your NBSAP or your national report gender responsive. So that was one. And actually, from the presentation in Tunisia, I could see some elements that were similar. So I'm glad if that was helpful for some of the colleagues at the national level. That was one of the main learning process. There was also a online course that has been developed similar to gender and the processes around NBSAP and national reporting that we can definitely share in the chat as well. And maybe as resources, I'm sorry, it's very loud outside. And as resources post webinar, that's not a problem. So yeah, there has been a lot of lesson learned from our side and colleagues from other initiatives. If there is something that you would like to add here, please jump in.
Great, thank you, Marianne. So I see a few more pieces or questions and comments coming in, which is great. First of all, presentations will be shared. So if you're here, you will be getting a recording of the webinar, which it will include, the recording of the screen and all of that information. I love this idea of an intercambio or an exchange, between pairs. Of course, yes, it will take time to organize, but it's a great idea to think about learning from each other in some form of exchange, possibly some kind of extension of a peer-to-peer exchange as we're already kind of thinking and planning. I also see from Mongolia the ask to do a webinar on monitoring, specifically on the Gender Action Plan, or whether there's any support resources available on setting indicators, monitoring frameworks during the implementation. I think that's a great specific focus of a webinar. I wonder if any of our speakers want to respond to that suggestion and idea. But of course, great idea. There are many resources always out online and out for how to develop indicators that can be shared definitely beyond this webinar. But Marianne, go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, and maybe Olivier, you have more information here on the indicator, and I know the CBD Secretariat is doing a lot of work on indicators. I would say we do have colleagues from UNEP WCMC that are very much focused on indicators and supporting this work around the monitoring framework. So that can be maybe a next step that we do after this call and see if there is any relevant information on this specific topic. If I'm not wrong, Women for Biodiversity also did work around indicator for target, I think 22 or 23, which might be something that we want to share afterwards. There was an entire methodology, and then the indicator has been accepted and received as such. But maybe over to you, Olivier, if you have additional content here.
Yes, no, Marion, I think those are two examples of work that's being done on the specific aspect. In addition to that, there are some countries that are specifically interested in supporting projects that deal with the monitoring framework and the gender element for consideration. One other thing that we are undertaking at the Secretariat, of course, is those dialogue, NBSAP dialogues and capacity building activities where, if relevant, one could integrate a component of that, of monitoring into that, the monitoring and gender into this sort of planned workshop. So that's something I'm going to discuss with colleagues internally and see if that could be of interest and if we could find a space to do that.
Great, great. I love this rapid response too to the ideas and questions coming in. We're all full of productive energy today. And I see, Leah, thank you so much for those resources. There's some resources in the chat, I think, to respond to that specific question still. thinking about indicators and monitoring. So links in the chat to respond as well. And I see that there was one question. I think we'll close on this question since we are getting to the last 10 minutes, but a question for Reem for Tunisia. What challenges did you face in the work that you did? How did you go about addressing those challenges as you faced them in that effort? So Reem, if you're here, please go ahead and answer if you can.
Alors oui, bonjour, merci pour la question. Alors bon, le premier
Yes,
défi,
thank you very
c'est
much for the
la
question. The
donnée,
first
la collecte de
challenge
données, qui n'a
were
pas été facile
data,
à faire parce
which
que en
were
général,
not difficult
il
to
n'y a pas de
collect,
système
because in
déjà mis
general,
en place pour avoir
we
des
don't
bons
have a
statistiques
system in
pour
place to
rendre
have
la
access to
biodiversité
specific data concerning
sur
biodiversity.
plusieurs
And
aspects,
in
notamment l'autonomisation,
many
mais aussi
aspects,
l'intégration dans les projets
mainly
aussi. Donc ça, c'est
empowerment
un
and the
grand défi.
integration of
Et d'ailleurs,
projects
c'est pour
in
ça qu'après,
biodiversity,
quand
that
j'ai
was a
précisé les points
major
d'entrée, un
challenge.
des points d'entrée
And
recommandés par
when I
l'ONU,
talked about the entry
c'est de
points,
mettre
there
en
was
place
one of
justement ces
them
systèmes de
that
collecte de données.
was about
Le
putting in
deuxième
place
défi,
the
c'est
data
la proche
collection
méthodologie. On
method.
a fait
And
beaucoup
the
d'efforts
second challenge
pour
was a
avoir une
methodology.
méthodologie
We made a
assez
lot of effort
rigoureuse
to
avec des
have a
documents d'action.
rigorous
Certes, il y a des lignes
methodology
directrices
to
qui sont
collect
donc
this information
recommandées par
and
notamment le PNUD dans le
guidelines
domaine de
also
la
that were
biodiversité.
recommended by
On trouve
UNDP
des
on
lignes directrices un peu
biodiversity.
partout, mais
There you
la
can
proche
find important
méthodologie pour
guidelines,
pouvoir élaborer un
but
plan d'action genre
in the
aligné
face of our methodology,
et
we
à la
wanted
stratégie et
to
le plan
have an
d'action
action plan
national
which was
de la
aligned with the
biodiversité en
strategy
diplomatie
and the
et le plan
national
d'action
plan, and
commun
also the
d'égalité
action
des sexes,
plan
donc
for
de la COP
gender
de
equality,
Montréal
and
et du plan d'action GBF
also within the
AS.
framework
Donc
of the
ça, c'est
KMGBF
l'approche méthodologique.
and
Et
the
là,
Jeff
c'est
8,
c'était un
sorry.
défi pour
So
nous.
this
Voilà, pour
was a
donc, et
challenge for us,
ça serait, si
undoubtedly.
on a une recommandation
So
à faire,
if
c'est
we
que
have to make a
peut-être donc
recommendation, it would be
GBF
to,
donc travaille plus sur
in
des
terms of
outils,
the Jeff
des guidelines
8,
encore
to
plus
work
détaillés,
harder
plus
on the
clairs pour
guidelines
appuyer peut-être les
and
pays pour élaborer
toolkits to have
ces plans
more
d'action
clear
qui doivent être
orientations
alignés et qui doivent
so
être
that
connectés à ces
countries
stratégies.
can
Donc voilà,
elaborate
remercie.
their projects in an interconnected manner, taking into account the different strategies. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for those sharing of those challenges, but also, getting productive and thinking about a recommendation for how to overcome those challenges. I mean, they're challenges we hear often, right? The data availability, also making sure they're rigorous, and also, I imagine, some kind of systematization of clear, rigorous methods. But those are challenges that I know the hosts here today have been trying to address, and we hope that these projects providing support will also help to address as we make progress over time. So I'll hand back. Thank you so much for your questions, everyone, for our speakers, for their responses. I'll hand the floor back to Olivier to manage our closing. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much, Laura. And as we're now moving to the end of our time together, but before we do close, we want to make sure that we hear from our esteemed colleague Verona from the Jeff, who will provide some brief closing remarks. So Verona, you have the floor. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Olivier and colleagues, the organizers. I hope you're hearing me well. Yeah. So first of all, I really want to thank all the presenters because that was such a those were very inspiring sharing of experiences on how you were able to integrate gender in the NBSAPs and how the support from the Jeff, from UNDP, from UNEP, from the CBD Secretariat has advanced this. So as the gender specialist here at the Global Environment Facility, We obviously take very seriously this policy and the requirement to integrate gender in the projects that are funded by the Global Environment Facility. What is very delightful, I should say, and inspiring for this particular project is how the implementing agencies have also made the extra effort of ensuring that gender is not just a tick the box exercise, because we know that in most cases there's still this idea about, oh, let's just do the minimum and let's just make the donors happy. But in this particular project, I'm so delighted to really see how the implementing agencies, also with the support of the CBD Secretariat, have done really great work in every step of the way, from the design to now the implementation, and supporting countries in actually operationalizing what is in the design. From where I sit at the GEF, I look at it from the design, and we can actually see projects that are very nice, nicely worded, very good gender action plan, and so on. But then at the implementation stage, there's no support. And this particular project, I would just really like to commend UNDP and UNEP as the implementing agencies for making sure that through implementation, there is support in how you translate what is at the design stage into on the ground and on paper, on policies and on strategies. And I thank all those countries who made presentations on how they've done it. And going forward, I should just reinforce that this is the right track, because going into GEF 9, we are actually the next replenishment cycle of the Global Environment Facility. We're actually looking into revising our results framework, the management results framework, and gender is actually, we're trying to find an indicator, a dedicated indicator on how we advance gender equality / women's empowerment in our projects, beyond just having this beneficiary disaggregated by sex. So this is really a big way forward, and also capturing other socioeconomic benefits. So I just want to mention that as a positive step forward for the GEF, and also just to really capture all of these lessons learned that you've shared today and how we can amplify them. The Global Environment Facility, and I will be coordinating with the implementing agencies. We have the GEF Gender Partnership, of course, which you know of. And we want to capture all these lessons, because we just don't want them to stay in some websites, web page within a website, but to amplify and raise visibility for it. And the GEF is here to share, to be able to support you with that. And into the 8th GEF Assembly, we want to have a package of best practices, and this is one candidate for that. The GEF Assembly is next year in June, and I would like this to be one of the best practices. And finally, one last part, we would also want to be engaged, the GEF would like to be engaged in your work on the ground, so we can make this part of our learning, the GEF learning missions, so we can join you in your workshops, in your other activities, and we're very happy to just be here and just tap on us when we'll be able to happily join you in this great work that you're doing. So thank you again. And really, I encourage you to just do this, continue your great work, and tap us, tap the GEF, tap myself for any support you may need. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Verona. And as always, we're very appreciative of the support of the GEF and through you. And we thank you. We thank you all for attending today and engaging today. We hope that today has clarified some issue, say in regards to what support in terms of gender work might look like, how to get certain types of gender integration support, and also other issues with regards to access to funding and support. Thank you very much to the country colleagues who have shared their experiences, and to partners, colleagues who have offered very informative information on how you can get help. We would be grateful if you could take 5 minutes to respond to the Zoom survey that will show on your screen after leaving this meeting. Your responses will allow us to collect valuable information about the webinar and upcoming technical offering. Again, thank you for joining us today, for your engagement and for your commitment to equitable biodiversity action. And I want to also personally thank the organizers for entrusting me with the moderation of some sessions of this webinar. And we look forward to continuing this learning journey together. So thank you very much, and we'll be speaking soon.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.